comes a point where life stops feeling like it's happening to you and starts revealing something uncomfortable. You were never waiting for the right moment. You were delaying decisions, delaying discipline, delaying becoming the version of you that you already know you're supposed to be. And the hardest part is, you knew. Somewhere deep down, you always knew. But knowing something and acting on it are two completely different realities. Because action requires discomfort, and comfort is where most people stay trapped. You don't fall into failure all at once. You drift into it slowly. One skipped day, one excuse, one "I'll start tomorrow," until tomorrow becomes a habit that never arrives. And one day, you look up and realize time didn't pause for you. It kept moving. The world didn't slow down because you were figuring things out. It kept going. And now you're standing in the middle of your own life asking how you got here. But the truth is simple. You got here through repetition. Not one big mistake, but 1,000 small ones you kept justifying. And that's where the shift begins. Because if repetition built your current life, then different repetition can build a different one. Nobody is coming to fix your habits. Nobody is coming to install discipline into your mind. Nobody is coming to wake you up at the right time, make you eat better, think clearer, or move with purpose. That responsibility has always been yours. And that truth hits differently depending on who you are. For some people, it feels heavy. For others, it feels like pressure. But for the ones who are ready, it feels like control returning. Because if no one is coming, then nothing is stopping you either. Not your past, not your environment, not the version of you that used to quit early. All of that loses power the moment you decide to move anyway. Even when it's boring, even when it's slow, even when it feels like nothing is changing. That's where most people misunderstand discipline. They think it's about intensity, but discipline is repetition without emotion. It's doing the same thing when your mood is different. It's showing up when your mind is negotiating with you. It's ignoring the voice that says, just today off won't matter. Because it always matters. Not because of one day, but because of what one day turns into. You don't build a life in motivation. You build it in moments where you refuse to quit quietly, where nobody is watching, and you still choose effort over escape. That's where identity starts forming. Not when you feel strong, but when you act like you are becoming strong. And the truth is, nobody feels ready. Nobody wakes up and feels fully prepared to change their life. That version of readiness doesn't exist. It's created through action, through movement before clarity, through discipline before confidence. And right now, you might still feel like you're behind, like you should have figured it out already. for your mindset to catch up with your goals. You move first and let your mindset adjust through experience. Because clarity doesn't come before action, it comes from it. And this is where everything starts to shift. Not when life gets easier, but when you stop negotiating with yourself. When you decide that your word to yourself matters more than your mood. When you realize discipline isn't punishment, it's protection from the life you don't want. And once you see that clearly, you stop asking when change will come, and you start becoming the change. Comfort is deceptive. It doesn't announce itself as something dangerous. It doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like relief. It feels like rest. It feels like I deserve this after doing almost nothing that actually required resistance. And that's how it keeps you exactly where you are. Because comfort doesn't stop your progress all at once. It slowly replaces your urgency. It convinces you that you don't need to move today because you already moved yesterday. It tells you that you've done enough, even when nothing has really changed. And if you listen to it long enough, your standards begin to shrink without you noticing. What once felt like a basic expectation for yourself becomes optional. What once felt like discipline becomes effort. What once felt like effort becomes too much today. And before you realize it, your life starts adapting to your lowest consistent state instead of your highest potential. That's what comfort does. It doesn't destroy you, it sedates you. And the scariest part is that you can live inside it for years without feeling like anything is wrong. Because comfort is not loud, it's subtle. It shows up in the decision to skip what you said you would do. It shows up in staying longer in distractions than you planned. It shows up in choosing what is easy over what is necessary. And every time you choose it, you reinforce a version of yourself that avoids resistance. But growth does not live in avoidance. Growth only exists where resistance is present. You don't become stronger in comfort. You become familiar with comfort. And familiarity is not progress. Familiarity is repetition without evolution. That's why so many people feel stuck even when they are trying. Because trying inside comfort is not the same as transforming through discomfort. At some point, you have to be honest with yourself. Not harsh, just honest. Ask yourself, how much of my life is built around avoiding discomfort instead of building something meaningful? Because version of yourself you were supposed to become, but never fully stepped into. And the truth is, nobody is coming to interrupt your comfort for you. No one is going to force you to rise earlier. No one is going to pull you out of distraction. No one is going to replace your habits. That responsibility stays with you, which means every day you are making a choice, even when it feels like you're not. You are either choosing temporary comfort or long-term change. And the more you choose comfort, the more it becomes your identity. Not because you are weak, but because repetition always wins over intention. You can intend to change your life for years, but if your daily actions stay the same, your life will stay the same. That's the part most people struggle with. They confuse awareness with transformation. But awareness without action is just observation. And observation doesn't build anything. It just shows you what you already are. Which means at some point, you have to stop analyzing your situation and start interrupting it. Interrupt the pattern. Interrupt the routine. Interrupt the version of you that always chooses ease over effort. Because comfort will always be available. It doesn't expire. But opportunity does not stay open forever. And every time you choose comfort over action, you are training yourself to avoid the very thing that could change your life. Discipline feels like resistance at first, because it is. You are pushing against old patterns, old impulses, old identity habits that were built over time. And that resistance is uncomfortable because it is unfamiliar. But unfamiliar is exactly where change lives. Not in what you already know, but in what you are willing to do repeatedly, even when it doesn't feel natural yet. That's the difference between staying the same and becoming different. Comfort tells you to wait until you feel ready. Discipline tells you readiness is created through movement. Comfort says later. Discipline says now. And your life is shaped by which voice you listen to more often. Not once, not occasionally, but consistently. Because consistency is what turns choices into identity. And identity is what determines your future without you even realizing it. So if you want to understand where your life is heading, don't look at your goals. Look at your patterns. Look at what you repeatedly do when nobody is watching. Look at what you default to when there is no pressure. Because that is who you are becoming. And if that version doesn't match where you want to go, then something has to break. Not your life, your discomfort. There is a stage in every transformation that nobody talks about because it doesn't look impressive, it doesn't feel exciting, and it doesn't give you instant proof that anything is changing. It's the quiet work, the invisible phase, the part where you're showing up consistently, but nothing around you has caught up yet. No applause, no recognition, no external confirmation that you're on the right path, just repetition. And that's where most people quit, not because they can't do the work, but because the work doesn't feel like it's working yet. But the truth is, real change rarely announces itself early. It builds underneath the surface first, like something forming in silence before it becomes visible. And if you leave too early, you never see what was actually developing. That's why discipline is not emotional, because emotions demand proof, and growth doesn't always provide proof on your timeline. You don't always feel different while you're becoming different. You just keep going, even when it feels like nothing is happening, even when the results are delayed, even when your mind starts questioning if it's worth it. Because that's the real test. Not whether you can start, but whether you can continue when starting energy is gone. Anyone can begin something with motivation, but motivation doesn't survive repetition. Only identity does. And identity is built in the quiet, when you're doing the work and nobody is watching, when there's no audience, no validation, no external pressure forcing you to stay consistent, just you, and the decision to keep your word to yourself. That's where most people underestimate their own power, because they think change requires external structure. But the strongest structure is internal. It's the agreement you make with yourself that your actions will not depend on how you feel. That agreement changes everything, because once you stop relying on feelings, you stop being controlled by them. And that's when discipline starts to form, not as a task, but as a standard that doesn't fluctuate based on mood or environment. You show up because that is who you are becoming, not because you feel like it. And in the beginning, that feels forced. It feels unnatural, because you are breaking old patterns that were built over time. Patterns that told you to wait. Patterns that told you to avoid discomfort. Patterns that told you it's okay to skip just this once. But the quiet work doesn't negotiate. It doesn't argue with your excuses. It simply asks one question. Are you going to do it anyway? And every time you answer yes, you weaken the old identity and strengthen the new one. Not instantly, but gradually. improving without applause, building without needing permission. There will be days where it feels pointless, days where your effort feels disconnected from results, days where you question if anyone would even notice if you stopped. But those days are part of the process, because they test whether your discipline is real or conditional. Conditional discipline only works when things feel good. Real discipline works regardless of feeling, and that difference determines everything, because your future self is not built in big moments. It is built in unnoticed ones. The days you chose effort when no one would have blamed you for quitting. The moments you stayed consistent when it would have been easier not to. The private decisions that shaped your direction without announcing themselves. That is the quiet work. And over time, it becomes undeniable. Not because it became louder, but because it became stronger. Stronger than distraction, stronger than doubt, stronger than the version of you that used to rely on comfort. And one day, you look back and realize something changed without you realizing exactly when it happened. Because it didn't happen in a single moment. It happened in thousands of small ones. And that's why most people never see it coming. They wait for transformation to feel dramatic. But real transformation is subtle, almost invisible while it's happening, until suddenly it isn't. There comes a point in discipline where something subtle happens. You stop asking who you are becoming because you start seeing it. Not in one dramatic moment, but in fragments. In the way you react differently now. In the way you don't negotiate with yourself as much. In the way things that used to pull you off track don't pull as hard anymore. And you might not even notice it at first, because change that is real doesn't always announce itself. It replaces you quietly, piece by piece. The version of you that used to delay things doesn't disappear overnight. It gets overwritten, not erased. Overwritten by repetition, by consistency, by the accumulation of choices you kept making when it would have been easier not to. And one day you realize something strange. The old version of you feels distant, not like a memory you're attached to, but like someone you used to know. That's when you know you're changing for real, because growth doesn't just add to you, it replaces you. And the replacement doesn't feel dramatic, it feels normal. Until you look back and realize how far you've moved from where you started. But here's what most people don't understand. Becoming unrecognizable doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means finally becoming consistent with who you always said you wanted to be. It means your actions finally match your intentions. Your habits finally match your goals. Your discipline finally matches your potential. And that alignment changes everything. Because when you're aligned, you don't need to force yourself as much. You don't need constant motivation. You don't need emotional People around you notice it before you fully understand it yourself. They notice you're different, not because you announced anything, but because your patterns changed, your energy changed, your discipline became visible through your consistency, and the version of you that used to explain everything starts becoming the version that doesn't need to explain anything at all, because results start speaking where words used to. But even then, something deeper happens internally. You begin to understand that discipline was never just about productivity. It was about identity, about trust, about becoming someone you can rely on even when everything feels uncertain. And that changes how you see everything. Because once you prove to yourself that you can change, you stop believing in the version of you that says you can't. That voice loses authority, not because it disappears, but because it stops being followed. And that's the real victory. Not becoming perfect, not becoming flawless, but becoming consistent enough that your old limitations no longer define your decisions. You don't become unrecognizable by accident. You become unrecognizable by repetition, by choosing discipline when it felt inconvenient, by showing up when it would have been easier to disappear, by staying in the work when no one was there to validate it. And now, you're here, at the point where the life you once thought was distant starts becoming your baseline. Not because everything changed around you, but because something changed within you. And that is where everything shifts. Because when you change internally, your external world has no choice but to adjust. Not instantly, but inevitably. And now you understand something most people never fully grasp. Nobody is coming to save you, because you were never meant to be saved. You were meant to be built by your own choices, by your own discipline, by your own willingness to stay in the process longer than your emotions wanted you to. And if you made it this far, it's because something in you already knows that. So this is where episode 1 ends, not with arrival, but with awareness that everything you want requires a version of you that is willing to stop waiting and start becoming, day after day, choice after choice, in silence, in repetition, in discipline, because nobody is coming, and that is exactly why you will.